Zektar the Bone Render had stalked prey across 17 star systems, left entire civilizations trembling at the mere whisper of his name, and once made a Rigelian deathworm cry just by looking at it funny. So naturally, when the Vortak High Command assigned him to some backwater human colony called New Eden, he was a little insulted. "Ha, humans," his briefing officer had snorted, mandibles clicking with amusement. "Fragile little bipeds. No claws, no natural armor, no venomous sacs. They die if you look at them too hard. Should take you, what, an hour?" Zektar had accepted the assignment with the enthusiasm of someone being asked to hunt particularly slow-moving houseplants. But orders were orders, and his reputation demanded perfection, even if that perfection involved terrorizing what were essentially galactic weaklings. His stealth ship descended through New Eden's atmosphere like a whisper of death. Cloaking systems engaged, weapon arrays primed. Below him sprawled a pathetically peaceful farming village, complete with white picket fences and flower gardens. The humans had built their little settlement in a valley, surrounded by rolling green hills that would make excellent hunting grounds. How considerate of them. Zektar activated his prey scanner, watching thermal signatures scatter as his ship's shadow passed overhead. Good. Fear was the appetizer to any proper hunt. His targeting system identified 43 humans of various sizes, all following predictable panic patterns. They were fleeing into their dwellings, probably to cower behind whatever primitive defenses they could muster. He landed his ship just outside the village perimeter with enough force to rattle windows and set off car alarms. The dramatic entrance was important. Psychological warfare always preceded the physical kind. Zektar emerged from his cockpit in full battle armor, his 7-foot frame bristling with weapons that could level city blocks. His helmet's optical array glowed menacingly red as he surveyed his hunting ground. This was going to be almost disappointingly easy. The village square was empty except for a few abandoned market stalls and one overturned bicycle. Perfect hunting conditions. Zektar activated his vocal intimidation protocols, his voice booming across the settlement with enough bass to crack foundations. "Humans of New Eden. I am Zekra the Bone Render, apex predator of the Vortek Empire. Your fear feeds my strength. Your terror sustains me." "Oh wow, are you a robot?" Zektar's dramatic monologue died in his throat. His helmet's audio receptors swiveled toward the source of the interruption, and his prey scanner immediately locked onto a small thermal signature that had apparently materialized from nowhere. Standing about 20 feet away, completely unbothered by 7 feet of armored death machine, was the smallest human Zektar had ever seen. The human cub couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall, with bright yellow hair and eyes the color of Earth's sky. It was wearing what appeared to be pajamas covered in cartoon spaceships, and it was staring at Zektar with the kind of wide-eyed fascination usually reserved for particularly interesting insects. "Are you a robot?" the tiny human repeated, taking a step closer. "Because if you are, that's really cool. My name's Tommy Hendricks. What's your name, Mr. Robot?" Zektar's threat assessment systems were having what could generously be called a complete nervous breakdown. Every sensor was screaming contradictory information. Threat level, 0. Fear response, non-existent. Prey behavior absolutely baffling. "I am not a robot," Zektar managed, his vocal intimidation protocols automatically downshifting to something less likely to burst the small human's eardrums. "I am Zektar the Bone Render. And you should be running in terror." Tommy tilted his head like a curious puppy. "Why would I run? You seem nice. I like your glowy eyes. They're all red and sparkly. Are they like Christmas lights?" This was not in any of the hunting manuals. Zektar had faced down Klaxian warriors who fired acid from their tear ducts, but somehow this miniature human was more confusing than anything he'd ever encountered. His targeting computer kept trying to lock onto Tommy, then immediately disengaging because the threat level remained stubbornly at 0. "Tommy Hendricks," a new voice called from one of the nearby houses. "What did I tell you about wandering outside during alien invasions?" A female human emerged from a blue house with white shutters, looking remarkably calm for someone whose offspring was currently chatting with a galactic apex predator. She had the same yellow hair as the small one, tied back in what humans called a ponytail, and she was wearing gardening gloves. "Sorry, Mom," Tommy called back, not taking his eyes off Zektar. "But look, there's a really cool robot man in our yard." The female human, presumably Tommy's mother, walked over with the casual stride of someone approaching a neighbor's friendly dog rather than an armored killing machine. She stopped next to Tommy and looked Zektar up and down with the clinical assessment of a scientist. "Alina Hendricks," she said, extending a dirt-smudged hand. Xenobotanist. And you are? Zektar stared at the offered appendage. In 17 star systems, no prey had ever introduced themselves before he killed them. It seemed almost rude not to respond. Zektar, he said slowly. The Bone Render. Nice to meet you, Zektar. That's quite a title, very dramatic. Tommy, honey, stop trying to touch the nice alien's weapons. Zektar looked down to discover that Tommy had somehow moved within arm's reach and was indeed reaching for his plasma rifle, with the confident curiosity of a child investigating a new toy. These aren't toys, Zektar said, though he made no move to stop the small human. His threat assessment systems had apparently given up entirely and were now just playing soft jazz. They are instruments of destruction. Wow, Tommy breathed, his small hand hovering just above the weapon's power core. Do they make pretty lights when they go boom? Yes. Very pretty lights. Usually the last thing my prey sees. Can I see? Please. I promise I'll stand way back. Elena Hendricks sighed, the way parents do when their children ask for a pony for the 15th time. Tommy, we've talked about this. No asking visiting aliens to demonstrate their weapons before dinner. It's rude. Zektar's vocal processors made a sound that was either a laugh or a system malfunction. He honestly couldn't tell anymore. Oh, Tommy suddenly exclaimed, his face lighting up like a miniature star. I almost forgot. Mom made cookies this morning. Do you want some, Mr. Zektar? They're chocolate chip, and Mom makes the best cookies in the whole galaxy. Before Zektar could process this offer, Tommy had already sprinted back toward the house with the boundless energy that seemed to be standard equipment for human offspring. Elena watched him go with the resigned expression of someone whose child regularly invited strange creatures home for snacks. I should probably warn you, she said conversationally. Tommy's in his adopt every stray that wanders into the yard phase. Last month it was a 3-legged cat. The month before that, a family of raccoons. You're definitely his most exotic find yet. Zektar's tactical analysis subroutines were running in circles. Are you not concerned that I could vaporize your offspring with a thought? Elena considered this with the same seriousness she might give to a weather forecast. Could you? Yes, quite easily. But are you going? Zektar opened his mouth to deliver a suitably menacing response, then realized he didn't actually have one. The honest answer was no, he probably wasn't going to vaporize the small human. The small human was far too interesting, and vaporizing interesting things before you understood them was generally poor scientific method. I am still deciding, he said finally. Fair enough. Take your time. Tommy burst back out of the house, carrying a plate that was approximately half his size, loaded with what appeared to be small brown discs studded with darker fragments. The aroma that wafted from the plate triggered scent receptors in Zektar's helmet that he didn't even know he had. Here! Tommy announced, holding the plate up toward Zektar's towering form. Try one, but be careful, they're still warm. Zektar stared down at the offered food. In all his years of hunting, no prey had ever offered to feed him. It was such a fundamental violation of predator-prey dynamics that his brain was having trouble categorizing it. His helmet's chemical analyzers were going crazy, detecting complex carbohydrates, processed sugars, and something called vanilla extract. This is food? He asked. The best food, Tommy confirmed solemnly. Mom taught me the secret recipe. You gotta use real butter, not the fake stuff, and you gotta tell the chocolate chips they're gonna be delicious while you mix them in. Elena nodded, as if this was perfectly sound culinary advice. Tommy's right about the butter. The chocolate chip psychology is still theoretical, but the results speak for themselves. Zektar's armor included a mouthport designed for emergency nutrition in the field. He'd never used it for anything that wasn't military rations or prey-directed protein paste. But his analytical protocols were demanding a sample of this unknown substance, and his curiosity subroutines were backing them up. He activated the mouthport and carefully extracted one of the small discs. It was warm, as Tommy had warned, and it smelled like nothing in his experience. Sweet, rich, with undertones of something that made his salivary glands activate despite themselves. He took a bite. 27 star systems worth of combat experience had not prepared Zektar for chocolate chip cookies. The combination of textures, the interplay of sweet and slightly bitter, the way the warm dough seemed to melt and crunch simultaneously, it was like a small explosion of sensory data that bypassed his logical processors and went straight to whatever part of his brain was responsible for pure enjoyment. Oh, he said, faintly. Oh my. Tommy bounced on his toes with excitement. Do you like it? Do you want another one? I knew you'd like 'em. Mom, he likes 'em. Elena smiled, the satisfied smile of someone whose cooking had just conquered an apex predator. I take it Vorthak cuisine doesn't include baked goods. Zektar was staring at the remaining portion of cookie in his gauntleted hand like it contained the secrets of the universe. We eat processed protein cubes, nutrient paste, Occasionally the organs of our fallen enemies, but only on special occasions. Well, that sounds terrible, Tommy declared with the brutal honesty of childhood. No wonder you're so grumpy. Here, try another one. The chocolate makes everything better. As Zektar reached for a second cookie, he caught sight of movement in his peripheral vision. Other humans were starting to emerge from their dwellings, drawn by the apparent lack of screaming and explosions. A large male in overalls was peering around the corner of what appeared to be a grocery store. An elderly female with silver hair was actually approaching the group, apparently unconcerned by the presence of an armored alien. "Elena, dear," the elderly female called out, "are you going to introduce us to your new friend?" Within minutes, Zektar found himself surrounded by humans, and not in the way he'd originally planned. Instead of cowering prey, he was facing what could only be described as an impromptu welcome committee. The elderly female turned out to be Mrs. Patterson, who immediately began fussing over whether he was getting enough to eat. The large male in overalls was Mayor Frank Kowalski, who shook Zektar's gauntleted hand with the enthusiasm of a politician during election season. "Welcome to New Eden," Mayor Kowalski boomed. "We don't get many visitors from off-world. Well, any visitors from off-world, really. This is exciting. Do you need somewhere to stay? We've got a lovely bed and breakfast on Maple Street." Zektar was beginning to suspect that his threat assessment systems hadn't malfunctioned after all. They'd simply encountered something so far outside their parameters that they'd shut down in self-defense. "I am not here for tourism," he managed. "I am here to hunt." "Oh, hunting?" Mayor Kowalski's face lit up. "Excellent. Deer season doesn't start for another month, but we've got plenty of rabbits if you're interested. Old Pete knows all the best spots." As if summoned by his name, a weathered human with a magnificent white beard materialized from behind a nearby fence. Old Pete looked Zexa up and down with the calculating gaze of someone who'd seen enough in his lifetime that alien visitors ranked somewhere between mildly interesting and Tuesday. "Fancy gear," Old Pete observed, nodding at Zektar's weapons systems. "But you might want to dial it back for rabbits. That plasma cannon looks like it could take out half the county." "I was not planning to hunt rabbits," Zektar said slowly. "What then?" Tommy piped up, still clutching his plate of cookies. "Deer? Bears? Ooh, are you going to hunt space monsters? That would be so cool." Before Zektar could explain that the only space monster in the vicinity was currently eating chocolate chip cookies, another human approached. This one was shorter and rounder than the others, wearing a flour-dusted apron and carrying what appeared to be a casserole dish. "Bruno Marsetti," the newcomer announced, extending his free hand. "I run the diner in town. Heard we had a visitor. Thought I'd bring over some of my famous lasagna. You look like you could use a good meal." Zektar stared at the steaming dish. "You brought me food. Without being asked, without being threatened." "Well, sure," Bruno said, as if this was the most natural thing in the galaxy. "You're new in town, probably haven't eaten in hours. What kind of host would I be if I let you go hungry?" "This is not how predator-prey relationships are supposed to function," Zektar muttered, more to himself than to his growing audience. Mrs. Patterson patted his armored forearm with the gentle authority of someone who'd probably been a schoolteacher. "Oh, honey, is that what this is about? You think you're supposed to be scary?" "I am scary," Zektar protested. "I am the apex predator of the Vorthok Empire. I have raised civilizations. I have made entire species extinct. I once stared down a cosmic horror, and it blinked first." The humans considered this information with the polite attention usually reserved for someone explaining their hobby. "That's nice, dear," Mrs. Patterson said kindly. "But you seem lonely." Zektar's vocal processors made a sound like a dying wail. "I am not lonely. I am a solitary hunter. Loneliness is for lesser beings who require social connections to validate their existence." "Uh-huh," Elena said with the tone of someone who'd just heard her 6-year-old explain why he didn't need to brush his teeth. "When's the last time you had a conversation that didn't end with someone dying?" Zektar opened his mouth to deliver a crushing retort, then closed it, then opened it again. The honest answer was approximately never, and somehow admitting that felt more vulnerable than facing down a battle cruiser. "My job requires a certain level of professional distance," he said finally. "Sure it does," Old Pete agreed. "But you're not working right now, are you? You're eating cookies and making friends. Seems to me like you're on vacation." "I do not take vacation." "Well, you're taking one now," Tommy announced with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "And you know what people do on vacation? They have fun. Mr. Zektar, do you want to see my rocket ship? I built it myself." Before Zektar could protest that apex predators did not examine the craft projects of human offspring, Tommy had grabbed his hand and was attempting to drag 7 feet of armored death machine toward a wooden structure in the backyard. that looked like it had been designed by someone with a very optimistic understanding of aerodynamics. The other humans followed along like this was perfectly normal, chatting among themselves about the weather, the upcoming harvest festival, and whether Zektar might like to judge the pie contest. For the first time in his career, Zektar was beginning to understand why some prey species evolved pack behaviors. There was something oddly comforting about being surrounded by creatures who seemed genuinely happy to see him, even if they had no idea who he was or what he was capable of. It was, he realized with growing alarm, actually rather nice. Zektar was in the middle of explaining to Tommy why his wooden rocket ship would need approximately 17 major design modifications to achieve orbital velocity when the sky exploded. Well, not literally exploded, but 3 Vorthak battlecruisers dropping out of hyperspace directly overhead certainly gave that impression. The thunderous boom of their arrival rattled windows, set off car alarms, and sent every bird in a 5-mile radius fleeing for their lives. The humans of New Eden looked up with the mild interest of people observing an unexpected weather phenomenon. Tommy pointed excitedly at the massive ships hovering above them like mechanical storm clouds. "More robots?" he squealed with delight. "Are those your friends, Mr. Zektar?" Zektar's threat assessment systems, which had been enjoying a pleasant vacation, suddenly snapped back to full alert. His combat protocols began running through worst-case scenarios at light speed, and every single one ended with his new friends being reduced to component atoms. "Get inside," he said urgently, his voice taking on an edge that hadn't been there since his arrival. "All of you, get inside right now!" But before anyone could move, the lead battlecruiser opened its landing bay and a figure descended on anti-gravity thrusters with all the subtle grace of a falling meteor. War Marshal Thrix hit the ground hard enough to crack the pavement, his massive form making Zektar look like a lightweight. Where Zektar's armor was sleek and predatory, Thrix's was a brutalist masterpiece of spikes, weapon mounts, and intimidation accessories. His helmet bore the scars of 100 battles, and his optical array glowed with the cold fury of someone who'd come to clean up a mess. "Zakar the Bone Render," Thrix's voice boomed across the village square with enough volume to rattle teeth. "Deport your standard. Why does this settlement still exist?" The humans clustered around Zektar like he was their personal protector, rather than the thing they should be protected from. Tommy, apparently operating under the assumption that more alien visitors meant more friends, waved enthusiastically at the War Marshal. "Hi there," Tommy called out. "I'm Tommy. Do you want some cookies too? We have lots." Thrix's optical array swiveled toward the small human with the mechanical precision of a targeting computer. His vocal processors made a sound like grinding metal. "What is that?" "That's Tommy," Zektar said, stepping slightly in front of the boy. It's complicated." "Complicated?" Thrix's voice dropped to a growl that could strip paint. "Zektar, you were assigned to eliminate this settlement 12 hours ago. Instead, I find you—" He paused, his sensors taking in the scene before him. "Are you wearing some kind of colorful restraint device?" Zektar looked down at his wrist, where Tommy's friendship bracelet made from rainbow yarn and plastic beads stood out against his black armor like a neon sign. "It's a friendship bracelet. Tommy made it for me." "A friendship bracelet?" "Yes, and you're wearing it." It seemed rude not to. Thrix's optical array dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again, as if his brain was trying to reboot. "Zektar, have you suffered a head injury, been exposed to mind-altering substances, contracted some form of human parasite?" "Nothing like that," Elena Hendricks said helpfully, stepping forward with the same calm she'd shown when meeting Zektar. "He's just been having a nice time. I'm Elena, by the way. Would you like some iced tea? You look overheated." Thrix stared at her for a long moment, his targeting systems trying and failing to classify a threat that offered refreshments. "You are offering me iced tea, sweet or unsweet? We have both. I am—" Thrix's vocal processors made a sound like a computer trying to divide by 0. "I am War Marshal Thrix of the Vorthak Empire. I have conquered 12 star systems. I once used a moon as ammunition." "That's impressive," Mayor Kowalski said admiringly. "Expensive, though. Moons can't be cheap to replace." "We don't replace them," Thrix said automatically. "We just conquer systems with more moons." "Ah, practical. I like that in a leader." More Vorthak warriors were descending from the battlecruisers now, landing in formation around the village square. Each one was a masterpiece of military engineering, armed to the teeth and radiating menace. The humans watched their arrival with the same polite interest they might show for a parade. Mrs. Patterson emerged from her house carrying what appeared to be a casserole dish large enough to feed a small army. "Oh, good, more visitors. I hope you boys are hungry. I've got tuna noodle casserole, green bean casserole, and that nice cornbread everyone likes." One of the Vorthak warriors, a hulking brute whose armor bore the insignia of a demolitions expert, stared at the offered food with the expression of someone whose worldview was actively collapsing. "Is that nourishment?" he asked hesitantly. "The best kind," Mrs. Patterson confirmed. "Made with love and entirely too much butter. Here, take a plate." The demolitions expert looked to Thrix for orders. Thrix looked to Zektar for an explanation. Zektar looked at Tommy, who was now attempting to show the newest arrivals his rocket ship with the enthusiasm of a tour guide. "And this is the engine compartment," Tommy was explaining to a Vorthok shock trooper. "It doesn't actually work yet, but Mom says if I study really hard in school, maybe someday I can build a real one that goes to space." The shock trooper knelt down to examine Tommy's craft with the serious attention of a professional reviewing technical specifications. "The thrust-to-weight ratio is problematic," he observed. "But the basic design principles are sound. Have you considered switching to a liquid fuel system?" "What's liquid fuel?" Tommy asked, his eyes lighting up with the joy of learning something new. Thrix's optical array began flashing rapidly, a sure sign that his cognitive processors were overloading. "Zektar," he said slowly, "why is Operative Crix giving engineering advice to a human larva?" "His name is Tommy," Zektar corrected, "and Crix is good with technical systems. Tommy's curious about propulsion mechanics." "This is not how conquests work," Thrix said, his voice taking on a note of desperate confusion. "There should be screaming, terror, begging for mercy. Instead, there's casserole." "Really good casserole," Bruno added, appearing at Thrix's elbow with a steaming plate. "Try the green bean. It's got those little fried onions on top." Thrix accepted the plate with the mechanical movements of someone operating on autopilot. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then made a sound that was definitely not in the Vorthak military manual. "This is surprisingly adequate," he admitted. 6 months later, Zektar was having what could generously be called an identity crisis, and what he privately thought of as the best time of his life. He stood in the middle of New Eden's main street, wearing his full combat armor accessorized with no fewer than 7 friendship bracelets, a hand-painted ceramic mug that read "Galaxy's Best Pest Control Officer," and a name tag that Tommy had made for him using construction paper and glitter. Lots of glitter. The name tag was supposed to say Zektar, but looked more like ZKTR because 6-year-old handwriting was apparently another thing the Vorthak Empire hadn't prepared him for. His current assignment was mediating a dispute between Mrs. Patterson's prize-winning roses and what appeared to be an infestation of Rigelian thorn slugs. The slugs, as it turned out, were actually quite reasonable, once you explained to them that eating someone's garden was considered rude by local customs. Most of them had agreed to relocate to the forest preserve in exchange for a steady supply of compost scraps from Bruno's diner. "Mr. Zektar," Tommy's voice called from across the street, "come see what we learned in school today." Zektar turned to find Tommy racing toward him with the boundless energy that had become a familiar and oddly comforting constant in his life. Behind Tommy came a group of other human offspring, all of whom had apparently decided that having a reformed galactic apex predator as a part-time babysitter was the most normal thing in the world. "We learned about space," announced a small female human named Lucy, who had appointed herself Tommy's co-conspirator in most of their adventures. "And Miss Jennifer said you probably know lots about space because you're from space." "That is technically accurate," Zektar confirmed, kneeling down to their eye level. It was a habit he'd developed after realizing that towering over small humans made conversations unnecessarily dramatic. "So we were wondering," Tommy said with the careful tone of someone approaching a serious negotiation, "could you teach us about space stuff? Like, really cool space stuff, please?" Before Zektar could respond, a familiar voice boomed across the street. "Zektar the Bone Render, report for duty!" War Marshal Thrix emerged from Bruno's diner carrying a to-go container and wearing what appeared to be an apron that read, "Kiss the Cook" in cheerful yellow letters. His fearsome armor was dusted with what looked suspiciously like flour, and his optical array had been dimmed to a pleasant amber glow instead of the usual intimidating red. "Thrix," Zektar acknowledged, standing up. "How's the bread coming along?" "Bruno's sourdough starter is a complex biological system," Thrix replied with the serious tone of someone discussing military strategy. "But I believe I'm beginning to understand the fermentation process. The humans call it artisanal, which apparently means unpredictable but delicious." The children looked between the 2 massive alien warriors with the delighted expression of people watching their favorite entertainment program. "Are you going to teach us space stuff too, Mr. Thrix?" Lucy asked hopefully. "I suppose I could discuss optical array," flickered uncertainly. "I suppose I could discuss interstellar navigation principles from an educational standpoint." "Yay!" The children cheered, and immediately began peppering both aliens with questions about hyperspace, alien planets, and whether it was true that some stars were actually made of diamonds. As Zektar found himself explaining the basic principles of faster-than-light travel to an audience of fascinated 6-year-olds, he caught sight of Elena Hendricks approaching with a tablet and the satisfied expression of someone whose research was going very well. "How's the paper coming?" he asked during a brief lull in the questions about whether space pirates were real. "Brilliantly," Elena replied, showing him the screen. "The Galactic Academy is very interested in interspecies friendship protocols through confectionery exchange. Apparently your case study is being used as required reading in their xeno-diplomacy program." "My case study? Well, you and the whole situation here. 3 separate departments want to send research teams to study how New Eden managed to accidentally solve the Vortak aggression problem that's been stumping galactic strategists for decades." Zektar considered this. "What did you conclude?" "The humanity's greatest tactical advantage isn't our technology or our adaptability," Elena said with a grin. "It's our complete inability to see something as purely dangerous when it could also be a friend. Plus, really good cookies don't hurt." Across the street, Old Pete was engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion with Operative Cricks about the best methods for preserving vegetables over the winter. Mrs. Patterson was teaching a demolitions expert how to knit, which seemed like it should be concerning but somehow wasn't. Mayor Kowalski was showing a group of Vorthak shock troopers the plans for the new community center, apparently incorporating their suggestions for defensive architecture into what was supposed to be a recreational facility. "Mr. Zektar," Tommy said, tugging on his armor plating to get his attention. "Do you think other aliens would like cookies too? Because if they would, maybe we could make friends with all of them, and then nobody would have to be scared anymore." Zektar looked down at the small human who had single-handedly dismantled his entire worldview with nothing more than curiosity, kindness, and baked goods. Tommy was looking up at him with those bright blue eyes full of absolute certainty that the universe was fundamentally a good place, where problems could be solved with friendship and sufficient sugar content. "You know what, Tommy?" Zektar said, adjusting his friendship bracelets and feeling his name tag shed a small shower of glitter. "I think you might be onto something." 6 months ago, Zektar the Bone Render had arrived on Earth, expecting to add another conquest to his impressive list of destroyed civilizations. Instead, he'd been conquered himself, not by superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but by a 6-year-old boy who thought sharing cookies was more important than being afraid. And honestly, it was the best defeat of his career. "Now then," he said to his eager audience of small humans, "who wants to learn about the 17 different types of faster-than-light drives and why most of them explode in interesting ways?" The cheers that followed could probably be heard from orbit, which seemed entirely appropriate for New Eden's first official alien cultural exchange program, even if it had started completely by accident, with a cookie, and the kind of human logic that treated apex predators like neighbors who just needed a good meal and someone to talk to. As it turned out, that might just be the most effective diplomacy in the galaxy.